Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Director, Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center; Ms. Coral Vinson, Mr. Siva Naidu; Advocate Sonele Kono Reddy; Ms. Leslie Ann Panselm; Ms. Zainab Priyadala; Ms. Sabile Buthelezi; Ms. Kavita Solanki; Ms. Srishti Harinarayan; Mr. Piyush Khandelwal; distinguished online guests. On behalf of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, it gives me great pleasure to invite you to today's program, celebration of birth anniversary of Dr. Nelson Mandela, theme being Sense and State of Being Beyond Discrimination. To begin today's program, I would like to invite our first guest speaker, Ms. Zainab Priyadala, an author and educator. Ms. Zainab Priyadala is an author, physiotherapist, and educator. She is the author of 3 fiction novels, an essay collection, and a poetry anthology. She acted as editor-in-chief of Drumbeat Stories on Women of Africa, which empowered women to write their short stories and poetry. She acted on the committee for the designation of Durban as Africa's first and only UNESCO City of Literature. She has an honorary fellowship in writing from the University of Lohar, United States, and is the winner of the Minara Aziz Literary Prize 2015. She currently resides in Durban and practices as a physiotherapist.
Thank you. Namaskar, Savona, and good day to all. It is with utmost joy and humility that I accept this opportunity to speak and share my thoughts with you on this most significant occasion, the birth anniversary of South Africa's most beloved father, Dr. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. May his soul rest in eternal peace. With this impetus, I wish to firstly thank the Almighty for the gift of words. I wish to then thank my gurus, my teachers, for the knowledge that was bestowed upon my restless, hungry mind. My deepest gratitude also goes to Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, and Ms. Cheryl Banwari Lal for giving me this esteemed task. Today, my topic focuses on the sense and state of being beyond discrimination. I have been pondering the means by which to answer this question. And as I thought about the words of the great poet and enlightened scholar Khalil Gibran, who once said that when in doubt, look first at yourself. As a poet, a writer, a mother, a physiotherapist, a daughter, a sister, and so many other roles that I play in my life, it is not often easy to spend a moment in self-reflection. But it is in these roles that I found the means in which I can begin by answering this question and telling you a story of my own life. A few years ago, when my daughter was 8 or 9 years old, she came home from school very upset. She told me that another child in her school had laughed at her lunch. Now I recall that I had given my daughter a slightly spicy sandwich, and the other children had laughed at the spicy smell. Without thinking, I asked my daughter if the other child was white or black or Indian origin. My own child looked at me puzzled. She didn't know. She was oblivious to color and race, and I, as her mother, who was supposed to be teaching her, had introduced this concept of race to her fragile mind. I became very restless, and after calming her down, I was unable to calm my own mind. Who was the perpetrator of discrimination here? Was it the child who laughed at a spicy sandwich? Or was it me who asked the race of this child? I remembered the words of Dr. Mandela, where I echoed that no one is born hating another. It is a learned behavior. As a mother, it was my responsibility to teach my child to never discriminate. I later began a conversation with her that many years ago, and this conversation follows to this very day. When she and I watched in horror the news about the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota in the United States by police officers, she had grown into understanding what prejudice was all about. And discrimination was something that is not a natural human state of being. I am proud that she is now able to engage in critical thought about discrimination, and I believe that from a child's eyes, a state of being beyond discrimination is a natural essence of all human life. Human life is a paradox. It has puzzled the saints, sages, and scholars for eons. The existential debate about the nature of man has filled the hegemony of religious debate in all religions. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist and Holocaust survivor, recounts in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, the following quote about his harrowing time in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Everything can be taken from man, but one thing. The last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose one's own attitude to any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. As human beings, we endure long years of both sorrow and joy, pain and pleasure. Our bodies wear out from age and disease. We suffer conflicts, both internal and external. We are constantly called upon to define ourselves by labels, good or bad, Hindu or Muslim, black or white, man or woman. This constant back and forth wears out our psyche and our soul as we struggle to accept the labels that we alone have created. Everywhere we look, we see differences. We see rich and poor, beggars and kings, people with power and people on the side of the road, powerless. We see people who are revered for their beauty, and we see people with terrible deformities. This inequality in the social fabric brings about the unfair treatment of people who are poor and powerless. This is discrimination at its core. The prejudice and different treatment of a person based on their age, gender, weight, ethnicity, race, color, wealth, beauty, religion, so many labels that it can never end. When we begin to have a mindset of us and them, we are engaging in discrimination at its fundamental level. Krishnamurti, the great Indian philosopher, said it very eloquently when he said, "You have to find out whether human beings, that is, you and I, can bring a total revolution in ourselves psychologically. When you change, not at a superficial level, but fundamentally, you affect consciousness. You are the world, and the world is you." Echoing this metaphysical idea, the poet John Donne talks about seeing the world in a grain of sand. This concept harkens to the place where the sense and state of being of a person is elevated. And when one person elevates his consciousness, it raises the vibration of the planet. I'm reminded of a story of the great Gautama Buddha, who rejected a life of luxury as Prince Siddhartha and chose to become a monk. He endured arduous training to reach enlightenment. One day, after reaching enlightenment, Buddha was walking in a village and found a path of thorns in his path. Unable to go any further, the high caste Brahmins laughed at him and told him that if he was truly enlightened, he would be able to walk on the thorns. Buddha began to walk on the thorns and became injured. A young, low-caste man came forward and began to sweep the thorns away. The Buddha embraced him. In that, the Brahmins became very angry and told Buddha that he had touched someone of an untouchable caste. It is here that Buddha says that people are not defined by their man-made caste, nor their color and creed, but by the actions they perform. In that way, the young man had reached a more advanced stage of enlightenment than the very Brahmins who had been training for many years. The Buddha and others such as prophets and messengers in all religions exemplified enlightenment and highlighted that a state of discrimination is based on ignorance and fear. Believing that we are in some way superior to those around us is a symptom of fear. This fear causes us great suffering. This is the reality. We do not live in the age of Buddha, of Christ, of the Prophet Muhammad, or any of the sages throughout history. Uncertainty and strife is all we see. We watch the news and see blatant examples of racism and discrimination. Women are subjected to murder and violence simply because of their gender. Black people are profiled and mass incarcerated and bloody battles. Our hearts are heavy, numb ourselves with intoxicants, food, friends. It does returns. I'm afraid of the hatred that is pervasive in the world right now. And banded together against a common enemy smaller than but in some ways it's good to feel this fear. Why? Because this is fear that wakes us up. The fact that so many of us are feeling discomfort with the in the human race is evidence that we do not accept the status quo. Something deep and existential inside of us, a soul or an energy light within all of us plugs into the divinity we are created for and tells us that this is not. Our anxiety when we see the mad state of this world is telling us that a sense and state of being that is deeper and far beyond discrimination is actually attainable. Our sense needs to begin from looking at how we have co-created this reality that we are living. We are all a system, humans, animals, fauna, the ether, the oceans, the wind and the fire. All of us connect to each other in a subtle state of being. The things we are experiencing are inviting us into a world where we need to change these things. We can say this is not how I would like my world to be. And it begins with one. As I said before, when you raise the consciousness of one, you raise the consciousness of the planet and all who live in it. Racism and discrimination is a virus that is curable and stole its way into the hearts of our soul when our soul immunity was low. We were guilty. Every of discrimination, of fear and hatred in major and minor forms. One day, the poems of the poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz and Hafiz and Maya Angelou, I realized that in this war we are fighting, we must fight our when we cleanse our intentions, we cleanse our words. We begin to allow a state of compassion and equanimity to guide our lives. This state is vital to navigate the rough sea of discrimination. Right action, or known some as dharma, can be reached by small acts of awareness, like teaching a child or a neighbor about being in a space that is non-discriminatory. It means being brave enough to call out discrimination when you see it. It means working to know a little bit more about the people who share our country and being compassionate about their struggles and being joyful about their successes. The state of being beyond discrimination means being sensible and enlightened before speaking or casting aversions or aspersions on a particular group. All these things are vital, and it points to one thing. Shakespeare said in his play Hamlet, "To this, above all else, to thine own self be true." If we took the time to quietly sit and reflect on who we are not our body, our riches, our degrees, or our social status. When we begin to meditate and quietly understand our own true selves, we can be true to the light that is in all of us. This light is the state of being beyond discrimination, and it is there in us all. I believe that in his long years in prison in Robben Island, in his solitude, Dr. Nelson Mandela was able to sit quietly with himself and get to know his own light. And it is this light of non-discrimination and peaceful acceptance of every human being as equal that still shines on the people of Africa and on the world. May we not be responsible for dimming this light and allow it to shine in his loving memory. At this time, at the end of my talk, I wish to extend my deepest condolences to the Mandela family on the death of their beloved daughter of Tata Nelson Mandela and Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. May the family find strength at this time and may her soul rest in eternal peace. My condolences and prayers go out to the families of the victims of COVID-19 that have left us. My deepest gratitude and blessings go out to the selfless frontline workers. Please stay safe and follow all safety precautions. May we overcome this trying time and emerge in a world that is clean, healthy, and free from all discrimination. Dhanyavad. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zainab Priyadala. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Tabile Nkolo Buthelezi, founder of the Tabile Buthelezi Foundation. Ms. Tabile Nkolo Buthelezi is an enthusiastic individual who is working towards establishing herself as an arts, culture, and heritage manager in South Africa. She has been involved in the creative economy for more than 20 years as a cultural ambassador and performer abroad through KCAP and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She has traveled to countries such as Peru, Kenya, Indonesia, India, Germany, France, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Swaziland, where she was involved in cultural exchange programs. She is also the founder and executive director for Tabile Buthelezi Foundation, working with the youth and women empowerment through community development initiatives.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for the prestigious invitation. And before I speak, I'd like to also reiterate what the previous speaker has shared. Rest in peace to Mama Uzinzi Mandela, the daughter of Utata Mandela and the late Umama Winnie Mandela. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family. So when I received the theme for today, the state and sense of being beyond discrimination, I wanted to first talk about my own experience based on the context and content that I live under. I'm a young Black South African living in a township called KwaMashu, Esinqawinqawini. Growing up, we've heard gunshots every night and it became a norm. Going in the streets outside of the township, you are labeled as ghetto, as a township kid, as someone who won't be more than just a person that is a part of a marginalized community. As myself, as the speaker has taught us, it begins with self-discovery and self-realization. The reason why I say going beyond discrimination starts with the self is because I look at the lives of Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, and so many more people that took a stand against racism, apartheid, and other forms of discrimination. It started with one individual having a dream, mandates to change the perception of the other, or shall I say, the perception of the self to the other. I go back to my personal experience of being someone from the township, being labeled every single day as someone who won't be good enough. I took the decision to say, nation faced or experienced will not define who I am. I had a self-realization and a self-discovery to say, Tabile, you'll be more. I took the action. I went, traveled around the world, and began to find identity in the self. So when I heard the topic being beyond discrimination, I first wanted to assert to say being beyond, or even thinking of exempting being beyond discrimination, it starts with the self. And when you know who you are and your roles, your morals, and your values, and then as an individual, you begin to discover who the other person is, and will begin to engage in how to live in a social cohesive society. When I talk about living in a social cohesive society, is not about me, Tabile, trying to tell people to come to the township and to change and to be like myself, but it's to begin to advocate, to educate what makes me the individual that I am, what makes me to be the Tabile Nokolo Buthelezi that I am. Once I've discovered that, I'll begin to have a conversation. I'll begin to also understand where the other person comes from. Because the discrimination comes from us lacking knowledge of what the other person is. We see color, we see race, we see creed, but beyond that, there's only one human race. And one human race can live in a social cohesive society. I've traveled to more than 20 international countries, not knowing a language. For example, going to Hungary, they only speak Hungarian. A population, maybe 10% of people can speak English. But what I used as a communication was my art, was my dance, was my music. And we began to have a conversation to say, yes, I'm Zulu, I'm Black, I'm young, I'm from a different country, but through our music, through dance, we can share our identity. So for me, as much as I can list a number of instances or cases of discrimination, I'd like to point out the solutions or what we as a society can bring forward. I'm not an expert when it comes to uh, uh, topics such as discrimination, but I'm an advocate of non-discrimination. So what I always tell people is that you don't necessarily have to be an expert, but you all have to be an advocate for issues. Being an advocate means if we see 1 ounce of discrimination, be it in our homes, be it in a society, be it in social media, we need to condemn those people. We need to confront those people. And most importantly, we need to hold those people accountable, because accountability is so. And when I talk about accountability, I'm talking about people saying, I know someone who's faced situations of racism, but I don't know a person who's racist. It starts with the self. We need to look around. We need to be allies of people experiencing such inequality, such situations, because it happens even in our workplace, even in our social media, where we see people being bullied because of them being gay, of them being in a state of mind that is different to what is seen as social media friendly or is seen as the norm on social media. So my question is, what are we individually doing to advocate for such situations, to advocate for people? Because some people will say, because I'm a feminist, I'll only be part of a feminist movement. Because I'm Black, I'm only going to be part of a Black society or a Black movement. But no, it's not about that. Living in a non-racial, non-sexist society means, yes, you can be an ally of feminists, of Black Lives Matter, but at the same time, you shouldn't isolate your thought to say only these certain lives matter. It means, yes, we do acknowledge that all lives matter. You're just an ally of that movement, but you're not exempted from saying, if I'm seeing something wrong, if I'm seeing someone of a different color than mine experiencing racism, I'll say, no, because this person is quote unquote white, it's not my problem. Wrong should be differentiated from right. We all know that wrong is wrong, right is right. So it shouldn't be, because I'm talking about things that we see on a daily basis on social media, where someone thinks, no, just because I'm not saying something face to face, it's fine because of social media. No, it's still your thoughts, and your thoughts are being projected on social media, which means it can harm an individual. So for me, as Tabile Buthelezi, I'd like to say it's our duty to make sure that we educate people about having that idea or having those thoughts to be allies of non-discriminatory movements. Something like this, what we are doing here, it's a small society, but it will have a ripple effect where other people will be seeing these conversations and other people's ideas, and they will have an encouragement, or they will also learn to say, oh, I thought what I was doing was right, because some people will say, no, I was taught to say, if you're white, I'm better than the next person. But if we have such platforms where we educate individuals to say, we understand what you were taught, but the reality is A, B, C, and D, because that's happened to a cross mixture of people, where we have people to say, I'm superior than someone else because of classism, because I have more money than someone who lives in Guamash. I live in a gated community and that person doesn't. So I deem myself as superior, ending up to discriminate that person. So my conversation is to say, in whatever form of medium that you are, in whatever form of work that you are, have a conversation with people. I'll talk about xenophobia. A lot of people that I've had a conversation with in the township, for them, they thought having violence or being violent against other African nationals who are not South African was the right thing to do. You know why? Because there was an individual that infiltrated that information to them, and they started believing it. So it's up to us to make those people unlearn, because yes, the learning experience is important, but the unlearning experience is much more important. And the unlearning needs to happen as well to those people who were there during the apartheid years. I'm talking about our grandparents, our great grandparents, because they were also taught that they have to fight against white people, against other people apart from Black people. So they too need to understand that we need to have a social cohesive society to move forward. And when we talk about apartheid and the racism experienced, most people will say, now it's the time for Black people to be in power. Let's eradicate all white people. They should go. No, it's because of what? It's because they didn't have the opportunity to be conscientized to say, okay, yes, we are now living in a rainbow nation, but what does living in a rainbow nation mean? What does living in a rainbow nation mean for someone who would say, I was oppressed for so many years by a white man and resulted in me having hate against someone who's not of my skin color? What do we do now as a society to say we need to unlearn? And the unlearning will only take place in such conversations, in such mediums where we in our own spaces, when I say spaces, I mean myself at home speaking to my grandmother who's 82, conscientizing her about what is going on. I'm talking about me as Tabile going to the people that I work with in my foundation, the Tabile Buthelezi Foundation, asserting myself and educating them about having to have conversation, to have a dialogue like this, to have a say, to say, okay, no, I understand where you are coming from, to say we are living or we should live in a in a cohesive society, but my experience doesn't allow me to be that way. We will then have a dialogue and understanding, and then we will reach that level of understanding. Before I leave, I'd also like to talk about the fees must fall. I was part of the youth that was marginalized. That is the first thing I spoke about. That is another form of discrimination, because the youth didn't have fees to pay for their tuitions. And those who did have fees were not excluded. So that's another form of discrimination against the students in marginalized communities who don't afford fees. But the youth had a conversation. There was only one person who had an idea to say fees must fall. And the fees did fall. People were able to go back to school. Same with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is our hero. He did stand up for racism, for oppression, and wanted us to live in a society where non-racial society, to have equality. But also, he was not alone. So many people, including even my uncle, went to exile for 10 years. There's so many people who are there together. So what I want to propose is that we should have a collaboration of people with the same mind, with the same ideas and philosophies, such as what has been doing this afternoon, to say, let's gather together, people of the same mind, to drive one common mandate, like Nelson Mandela, like Gandhi, like Dr. Martin Luther King, and many other pioneers. Together, yes, we can. In isiZulu, we talk about Ubuntu, which is umuntu ungumuntu ngabantu. You are because of others. So it's all about humanity and us bringing forward that sense of living beyond discrimination. But we'll not be able to live beyond discrimination if we are leaving people behind. Let's move forward together, and let's move forward first in our own individual spaces, so that it will have a ripple effect. If I manage to encourage other people in my township of Kwamashu to be woke, to have a conversation, to also allow themselves to express how do they feel about such conversations, we'll then begin to have an idea or a clear mandate of us moving forward. And then we will live in a free, democratic country that we want to see tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Davile Nicolo Butelezi. Our next guest speaker is Advocate Zanele Kono Reddy, a South African lawyer. Ms. Zanele Kono Reddy is a South African lawyer. She takes the shared responsibility of raising her 4 kids, 3 of whom are boys, very seriously in a society filled with gender and racial stereotypes. She is passionate about the development of young women, generally, and in particular young people within their own profession. Advocate Zanele facilitates and participates in programs promoting social cohesion and preservation of South African history. She serves as the chairperson of the advisory board to the UKZN Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Centre.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you to the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Centre at the Consulate General of India for the extension of the invite to be part of this especially important conversation. Greetings to all panel members. I firstly want to echo the messages of condolences to the Mandela family for the loss of Sis Zinzi Mandela. Having this conversation in light of the challenges that we face is important, as it reminds us of exactly what it is that we are working towards. and that is a non-racial and non-sexist society, which is, as we have put it in this conversation, a state of being beyond discrimination. So the state of being beyond discrimination is really an ideal that we must strive to attain globally. When we talk about an ideal, we cannot explore that ideal without confronting the prevailing circumstances or challenges that we as society are faced with. If you look all over the world, there are many forms of discrimination, from racism to slavery. Little girls in some parts of the world are being married off to 60-year-old men. Women are being raped. People of the LGBTQ plus community are still being killed. My view is that these prevailing circumstances and challenges that societies face on a global level all center around economics and the economic system that we are subjected to. However, my focus today is narrowed briefly to the South African landscape. In South Africa, our socio-economic construct mirrors our brutal colonial and apartheid past, notwithstanding the institution of apartheid as a legal system having been abolished. What we have inherited is a discriminatory social and economic construct, which at times is overt, at other times is subliminal. This construct still dictates our rights to, for example, human dignity, equality, and the rights we have most disturbingly seen in the matters of Collins Khoza, Sibusiso Amos, and Petros Miguels. To give you further examples, access to healthcare, education, success in professions which were historically reserved for the white population is still defined by this construct. So let's start from the beginning and inquire exactly what is it that we are required to do on the most basic level as human beings. And that is when we come into this world, we are expected to survive. Now, our survival in this world is dictated by our economic positioning within society. And the ease or difficulty of our survival is contingent upon what it is that each of us has at our disposal or what opportunity has been given to us. The reality is, for the majority of South Africans, that the ease or difficulty to survive is dictated still by our economic position that is defined by our colonial and apartheid past. Access to education, healthcare, the right to human dignity, and other rights is still disproportionately available to those who were previously advantaged. And that advantage remains divided along racial and gender lines. And this is the construct that we want to move away from. So the question for me is, how is it that we move away from that colonial and apartheid past, which dictates our economic positioning, to get to a state of being beyond discrimination? We must accept that to achieve such a state is a process. And this process needs to reverse or reconstruct a system that has been imposed on us for centuries. In this regard, there are different sectors of society that are contributing to this process, and these include government, NGOs, and ordinary civil society participating in different areas of the reversal and our country's reconstruction. Just to name a few of those, and that's government is embarking on a process of land reform, which I think is going to be a definitive moment in the process of reconstructing and reversal of South Africa's history. The fees must fall movement, as the previous speaker, Ms. Buthelezi, had mentioned, Then there are labor forces represented by trade unions. Also, there are many participants in this fight against gender-based violence that we see. Now, these sectors can be critiqued in many ways, particularly government and its enforcement of its own policy and law, which are meant to reverse and reconstruct the system that I'm speaking of. However, I do believe that the overall intention of government is bona fide. Part of my focus in this process has been in preserving South African history and promoting social cohesion. Why I think it is necessary to preserve our own history is apart from paying homage to those that came before us to take us to the initial stages of freedom. Recording our history serves as a reminder or as an instruction that we are all responsible for taking this country forward with the eventuality of realizing a state of being beyond discrimination. Also, what I think would contribute to social cohesion is to hold our oppressors to account for the crimes against humanity, which is apartheid. We have incidents of overt racism that emerge finding a public platform, which are received with much public outcry. I believe that one of the reasons why some people are so comfortable with being openly racist is because we have failed to prosecute our oppressors for these mass human rights violations. The renowned author and activist Ankie Krog, in response to de Klerk's denialism of apartheid, a crime against humanity, pointed out that every person, black and white, has an image of a black man reaching out forgiving whites, but no such image of image exists of a white person asking for forgiveness. And there, Krog was referring specifically to the picture of President Mandela wearing a Springbok jersey and holding up the arms of de Klerk and President Thabo Mbeki. De Klerk's utterances, unfortunately, are a definitive sentiment of a sector, and I'd like to believe that it's a small sector of the white population that refuses to account for and atone for the past. Now, exploring a state of being beyond discrimination, admittedly, has been quite a difficult task for me as a Black South African woman, having experienced all forms of discrimination from as early as when I was 6 years old. However, I'm quite confident and optimistic that in generations to come, there will exist a time where people will live without discrimination, and with discrimination being a thing of the past. With that being said, to reach that state of being without discrimination will take the combined efforts of ordinary people like you and me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Zanele Kono-Reddy. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Leslie Ann Pansal, founder and managing director of Khulisa Social Solutions. Ms. Leslie Ann Pansal was born in Johannesburg in 1955 and started her own marketing company at the age of 24. Khulisa Social Solutions operates throughout South Africa. Khulisa's mission is to address social vulnerabilities and inequalities by providing support and developmental know-how through key partnerships for initiatives at a community level that demonstrates social impact, inspires, empowers, and enables vulnerable children, youth, and the community at large. In 2007, Khulisa expanded to the UK, and in 2017, Australia. Kulisa Tanzania was registered in 2019. Collectively, Kulisa and Leslie Ann have both been awarded numerous local and international awards for their work in the arena of crime prevention, restorative justice, and community development. In 2001, Leslie Ann was elected an Ashoka Fellowship and has presented papers at international conferences globally. In May 2018, Leslie Ann received the London-based South African Chamber's prestigious Play Your Part Award. In 2019, she was announced as the winner of CEO Today Magazine Global Award 2019.
Good day, everybody. I'm very, very honored to be part of this discussion today in celebration of our beloved Nelson Mandela's birthday, the 18th of July. So my particular topic is the sense and state of being beyond discrimination. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself first. I come from a privileged background. My parents were very poor, and my father worked extremely hard all his life to provide the very, very best for his children. And I have taken my advantage in my life, and I have plowed back into working with those who have not experienced the privileges that I, as an individual person, have had. My life with my parents and my home was filled with unadulterated love. And it is this love that I have carried forward that has molded my life and the lives of the millions and millions of people that I've worked with over the years. So I'd like to start off by sharing with you my favorite quote of Nelson Mandela's, which says, "We must work for the day when we, as South Africans, see one another and interact with one another as equal human beings and as part of one nation united, rather than torn asunder by its diversity." I worked with cultural historian Creda Mutwa for 14 years, and this relationship goes back to deep apartheid days. As a spiritualist, I traveled around the world with him, experiencing and witnessing different types of culture. We went and worked in Machu Picchu. We worked with the Aboriginals in Australia. I traveled throughout Europe working in the Celtic Circle. And through listening to stories and writing at least 13 books with Creda Mutwa on African culture and comparing the cultures of indigenous tribes around the world, I, as a white person, feel so privileged that I have gained such great insight into African culture and the deep values that our traditional African people embraced. And that fundamentally is the sense of Ubuntu. But what's happened to our Ubuntu? Our young children have not experienced it in this country. For many, many decades, Ubuntu has not existed in our lives. So my little story goes back to exactly this month, 23 years ago, when Creda Mutwa and I launched Kulisa Social Solutions. It was with young people at risk at Walter Sisulu Place of Safety. And the program that we introduced was all based on storytelling. We took African fables and taught young people through the myths and legends and through the morals that African people used to share orally about how we can all become heroes and about how understanding on sense of self can lead to greater achievements in life. In October of that year, unexpectedly, I walked into Leeuwkop Medium B juvenile prison. And that day, when we launched our storytelling program, my life changed. I learned and developed from that day on a philosophy in my life is do not ever ask anybody what they did, but what happened to you. So, having listened to the stories of these young offenders who were in prison for some really horrendous crimes, I realized that they came from such dysfunctionality. They had no sense of self, that they had never been taught that there was a future for them. And as a result, they resorted to the one and only thing that society is providing them and still provides our young people, and that is joining gangs, becoming friends with gangsters, and resorting to crime. So storytelling was embraced by Kulisa, and as our offenders were released, we trained them as storytellers and sent them to schools. Now, I, having started my own business at the age of 24, am a serial psychotic entrepreneur. I have made so many mistakes. I've failed so many times, and every single failure has been a seed. And I'm very proud to say that I have so many forests that I'm now able to look back on and say, I'm so pleased I just did it. What we have done over the years is utilize storytelling as a way for people to express themselves, and by expressing themselves, create opportunities for dialogue, for people of diverse backgrounds to sit and listen to each other's stories and to understand where we come from. I believe that the biggest challenge we are facing in our country today is that we don't know each other. We don't listen to each other's stories. We don't begin to appreciate that we all have our story to tell, that we all have our origins. The biggest causal factor, I believe, of violence in this country, discrimination, xenophobia, and the deep-rooted hatred that we have in so many different areas of our country among so many groups is that we haven't listened to our stories. I would like to give an example. Kulisa does an extensive amount of work with people involved in gender-based violence. And we do restorative justice and mediations between victims and offenders. And when we start listening to the stories of the offenders and how and why they become so grossly aggressive and violent towards their victims, it's because of their frame of reference, because they've never understood themselves. They've been framed into a belief that they are worthless, and that's what's triggered this behavior. And I would also like to share with you that the past 2.5 years, I've wallowed in the world of albinism and have dedicated a substantial amount of time in trying to understand why the sector of our society is so brutalized, is so marginalized. And having worked with hundreds and hundreds of persons with albinism, not only in South Africa, but 4 African countries, listening to their stories and enabling them to tell and share their stories with the community at large, we've managed to broker understanding and love and compassion for the sector of our society. And today Kulisa employs 6 persons with albinism and are involved with almost 17 NGOs. Again, sorry, I had an interrupted call. Okay, so over the past 2.5 years, I've wallowed in the world of albinism. They are the most marginalized, brutalized, excluded sectors of our society. By working with these people and listening to their stories, I've learned to understand that the problem with this discrimination and brutalization comes ignorance. And until we start sharing with each other who we are and what the causal factors of this ignorance is or are, we will never be able to create cohesive, inclusive societies. So my message to everybody is we need to sit down and listen. We need to talk. We need to get to know each other. And please, South Africa, let's appreciate that we all have a story to tell. Let's learn from our stories and embrace our diversity, because it's only through this that we can embrace ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leslie Ann Sam. Our next guest speaker is Mr. Sivanaidu, a cultural activist. Mr. Sivanaidu is a community consumer and political activist for over 4 decades. He hails from Tongaat in north coast of Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. He is a prominent civic and welfare leader in the country. After democracy, he was appointed as a senior government official in KwaZulu-Natal and is currently an independent consultant specializing in consumer protection and promoting ethical business conduct and fair business practices.
Good day. I take this opportunity of thanking the Indian government for inviting me to participate in a session with other prominent South Africans, all of whom are undeniably key centers of influence in our country. The topic, sense and state of being beyond discrimination. What does this mean? Is this in fact possible or practical in today's society? South Africans understand the term discrimination like no other citizens in the world. Discrimination is a pervasive issue prevalent throughout the world. Everybody has a view on racism, from the anthropologist to the zoologist. It is a phenomenon based on prejudice, defined by one's physical experience, characteristic nature, color of one's skin, and by the ability or competence of a group. Nelson Mandela was born in the times of discrimination and racism and political and socio-economic turmoil in South Africa. But who is Mandela? He was born on July 18th, 1918 in Mvezo in the Transkei, which is in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. He was a social activist, a politician, a philanthropist, who became South Africa's first black president from 1994 to 1999. After becoming involved in the anti-apartheid movement in his 20s, Mandela joined the African National Congress in 1942. He died on December 5, 2013 in Johannesburg, South Africa. The most important characteristics, in my view, of Mandela are his strength of spirit, integrity, honor, and leadership. Mandela's strength of spirit allowed him to endure 27 years of imprisonment. He never compromised his beliefs, which shows integrity and a willingness never to give up the fight. He made many powerful speeches in his lifetime. But this following quote speaks directly to the theme, state of being beyond discrimination. I quote, "In judging our progress as individuals, we tend to concentrate on external factors such as one's social position, influence, and popularity, wealth, and standard of education. These are, of course, important in measuring one's success in material matters, and it is perfectly understandable if many people exert themselves mainly to achieve all these. But internal factors may be even more crucial in assessing one's development as a human being. Honesty, sincerity, simplicity, humility, pure generosity, absence of vanity, readiness to serve others, are qualities which one may reach would reach of every soul. These are the foundation of one's spiritual life." Unquote. Many identify him as a freedom fighter and struggle hero, some a terrorist, but very few truly understand and acknowledge his deeper moral and spiritual side. In this quote, he emphasizes the foundation of one's spiritual life. This, for me, is the kernel that binds him to being not just a struggle hero, but a servant, Ubuntu-spirited leader with a deep and abiding spiritual character. In many ways, Mandela mirrored the life of Gandhi, including the fact that both Mandela and Martin Luther King drew inspiration from Gandhi's approach of satyagraha and nonviolence. The key elements of this type of leadership that Mandela espoused was captured eloquently by President Obama when he paid tribute to Madiba at his funeral, and I quote, "And finally, Mandela understood the ties that bind the human spirit." There is a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, a word that captures Mandela's greatest gift, his recognition that we are all bound together in ways that are invisible to the eye, that there is a oneness to humanity, that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us. The key here is the statement, he taught millions to find the truth within themselves. All of spirituality is bound by one word, truth. This truth conveys that oneness reflects unity of humanity despite its diversity. Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal truth, speaks eloquently to the theme of oneness. Followers of Dharma, Dharmis, believe in one all-pervasive and all-loving Supreme Being. Though worshipped in different ways and by different names, in a variety of ways, there is ultimately only one God. God is not an Hindu, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim. Rather, God is the ultimate inspiration of all sects and religions, and this is the case whether any particular religion acknowledges this truth or not. Mandela may not have portrayed his spirituality by way of religious beliefs and rituals, but by his whole being, body, mind, and spirit, head, heart, and hand, and thought, word, and actions. Some of his quotes, which I will talk to now, attest to his deep sense of spirituality, unity, oneness, goodness, compassion, and sacrifice. And I'm quoting him here. During my lifetime, I've dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I fought against white domination, and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it's an ideal for which I'm prepared to die, unquote. In another quote, he argues, and I quote, "It is necessary to heal the wounds of the past if we are going to build our country and have unity. I'm working with people who fought me very bitterly before the elections. It was my responsibility as the man who is leading the majority party, my responsibility to heal the wounds of the past and to work with people who were my opponents," unquote. In yet another quote, he talks about, and I quote, "Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice for all the freedom of their people." He argues, and I quote, "A good heart and a good head are always a formidable combination." Mandela showed us that we are endowed with the intellect to review our attitudes, our beliefs, and our practices. History has recorded that South Africans had nearly half a century of statutory discrimination dismantled apartheid without a bloody revolution through the dedication of selfless leaders like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Mhlaba, and others. Therefore, is it not incumbent on us to apply ourselves and to be freed from the shackles of racial prejudices and bigotry that are inhuman and unacceptable? Mandela stood for unity in diversity. He stood for spirituality, for oneness, and ultimately to live as the source intended, accepting the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of humanity. This approach is guaranteed to usher in peace, prosperity, happiness, and a good life for all. It is possible to bring prosperity, happiness, peace, and contentment for all citizens in the world now. All that is required is the will to change and a commitment to support humanity on the principle of the fatherhood of God, and the brotherhood of humanity. This can be achieved with a return to Ubuntu spirited leadership, an approach, and a universal understanding of this practice of spirituality and oneness that Mandela espoused through his very words, thoughts, and actions. Long live the indomitable spirit of Tata Mandela. Viva Mandela, viva! I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Savanaido. We will now have a song recital by Miss Kavita Solanki, teacher of Indian culture at the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Consulate General of India, Durban.
Thank you, Cheryl ji. Namaskar, everyone. नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए, नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए। स्वतंत्र देश हो गया प्रभुत्वमय दिशामयी, स्वतंत्र देश हो गया प्रभुत्वमय दिशामयी। निशा कराल टल चली स्वतंत्र माँ विभामयी, मुक्त मातृभूमि को नवीन मान चाहिए, मुक्त मातृभूमि को नवीन मान चाहिए। नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए। चढ़ रहा निकेत है कि स्वर्ग छू गया सरल, चढ़ रहा निकेत है कि छू गया स्वर्ग सरल। दिशा दिशा पुकारती कि साधना करो सफल, मुक्त गीत हो रहा नवीन राग चाहिए, मुक्त गीत हो रहा नवीन राग चाहिए। नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए। युवक कमर कसो की कष्ट संकटों की राह है, युवक कमर कसो की कष्ट कंटकों की राह है। प्राणदान का समय उमंग है उछाह है, पगों में आंधियां भरे प्रयाण प्राण चाहिए, पगों में आंधियां भरे प्रयाण गान चाहिए। नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए, नवीन पर्व के लिए नवीन प्राण चाहिए। Thank you.
The translation of the song is as follows. For the new millennium, new energy is required. Our country has attained freedom, so can lead us into the right direction. Dark days are over and brighter days are ahead. The liberated motherland needs fresh energy and spirit. To make this a heavenly abode and easily reachable, one needs to continue with our efforts. Every direction is inviting us to continue with our fruitful sadhana. She is singing the song of liberation. We need a new melody for this. O youth, get ready to tread the difficult path. Be ready to offer your lives with zeal and enthusiasm. We need a dynamic song to strengthen our feet. Thank you, Ms. Kavita Solanki, for that beautiful song. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Coral Vincent, veteran human rights activist. After matriculating, Ms. Coral Vincent trained and worked as a medical technologist for 8 years. She graduated from the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine at the University of Natal with a Master of Medical Science degree, awarded cum laude in 2000. She is bilingual and has received many awards over the years. On the 22nd of July 2008, she was the recipient of the Gandhi Development Trustees Satyagraha Award in recognition of her enormous selfless contribution and dedication, commitment, and outstanding leadership provided during the difficult years under apartheid repression, as an active member of various support organizations and as an elected member of the United Democratic Front, and in particular the continued unswerving steadfast effort driven by integrity, compassion, and love towards the goal of a better life for all. Ms. Coral Vincent was presented with the Valyama Munasamy Mudliar Award for mobilizing for social justice on the 23rd November 2018 at the Radio Lotus SABC studio in Durban.
Namaste. Sanibonani. Good evening to everyone. I'm listed on tonight's program as a veteran human rights activist. That is true. I must be a veteran as I turned 89 last Friday. My journey as a human rights activist has brought me to an understanding of how discrimination harms everyone in a society and of the necessity to fight against all forms of it. I could have been like so many of my peers, a white South African housewife with all their prejudices, quite oblivious of what was going on for the majority in the country. It is because of the people I met and associated with who changed the path of my life, taking me to beyond discrimination. This is the story of my journey. Oh, I'd like to say, I'll just refer to what Zandeli said, that it is a process. It doesn't happen at once. So this is the story of my life. I was born in Cape Town of a South African mother and an English father who was transferred to Durban to work as a harbour engineer when I was 6 years old. My upbringing was that of an ordinary middle-class white girl growing up and schooling here. After matriculating, I was employed at the government pathology laboratory here in Durban and 5 years later qualified as a medical technologist. In the summer of 1956, South Africa experienced its worst polio epidemic. At that time, there was no virology laboratory in Durban, and I was offered the opportunity to work in the Polio Research Foundation's laboratory in Johannesburg for 6 months in order to learn and how to propagate and identify human disease-causing viruses. While in Johannesburg, I met my future husband, John Vincent, a civil engineer, and we married a year later. At that time, our government did not employ married women. So I had to resign, and shortly afterwards, the virology lab was closed down as there were no qualified staff to run it. While studying at university, John had been a member of NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, who campaigned for South African universities, which were all white at that time, to be open to everyone, regardless of colour. In 1959, he took me to the inaugural meeting of the Progressive Party that campaigned to extend the vote, the franchise, to every adult who had a junior certificate, and that is today's grade 10. So I joined the Progressive Party and was gradually drawn into non-racial politics, helping to run elections, and was soon elected chair of the women's group. I then decided to invite women of other race groups to address our meetings because white society at that time was very divided. And we only had, the only people of other races that we had contact with were domestic workers or gardeners or people that weren't our intellectual equals. So one of the women that I invited was Nomathemba Sithole, the secretary of the Umlazi Civic Association, because in those days African people were not allowed to belong to political parties or have political parties. Another was Togo Makanya, a nurse educator at King Edward VIII Hospital, when we were both members of an HIV/AIDS group. And Togo is still my friend this day from the 80s. So with a like-minded friend and as a qualified Federation of Women's Institute cookery and handcraft judge, we drove to KwaMashu once a month to attend the Zaki Women's Club there, sharing skills with their women members. And white people weren't really supposed to be driving in black townships in those days. It was through these friendships with women from other race groups that I became more and more convinced of the evils perpetrated in the name of apartheid and gradually moved into a state of beyond discrimination. The following are some of the anti-apartheid organizations with which I have been involved. I was a Black Sash member and actively participated in their activities, such as placard stands, attending political funerals, and sitting out in the nighttime streets of Chesterville with the wives of men who were on the run from the security police. I was the chair of Women for Peaceful Change now during the schools boycott, the treasurer of the Durban Detainee Support Committee, attending weekly meetings from 1981 until we were banned in 1988. In 83, I was elected to the Natal Regional Executive Committee of the UDF, the United Democratic Front. It was in those life-changing years that I was associated with many local activists, such as Archie Gumedi, the chair of the UDF, Paddy Carney from Diaconia, Bishop Reuben Phillip, Ela Gandhi, Jerry Kavadia, Zak Jacob, Chris Nicholson, Daya Pillay, conscientious objector Richard Steele, trade unionists Billy Nye, and of course the indefatigable Anne Colvin, the chair of the Black Sash in Durban. I became very interested in the link between art and human rights and have been involved in 4 major projects in Durban. The biggest such project that I convened was the production of the Images of Human Rights print portfolio. South Africa's most talented print artists were chosen by their art galleries to create images of the clauses of South Africa's Bill of Rights. That was the interim Bill of Rights. The Natal Technikon Art Department printed the 1,500 artworks that comprise the 50 limited edition portfolios. Constitutional Court Judge Albie Sachs opened that exhibition at the Durban Art Gallery in 1997 on International Human Rights Day, which is the 10th of December. When our youngest daughter had completed grade 11 in December 1980, I decided to return to work. I then learned that the health department had recently reopened a virology laboratory, so I was appointed to work there. In 1984, another polio epidemic occurred, and by now I had caught up with the advances made in the intervening years when I was at home and could cope with the volume of specimens floating in. So I was in full-time employment when the bulk of my human rights activism was taking place. In 1991, soon after Nelson Mandela was released from Pollsmoor prison, some of us who'd been involved in the struggle met and formed the Durban branch of Amnesty International, the global human rights organization. I have served as chair, treasurer, and treasurer since then, and presently am the deputy chair, having been the chair for the last 3 years. I really value my years as a member of Amnesty International, which has exposed me to global human rights concerns and helped to cement my attitudes towards social injustice and unfair discrimination. Nelson Mandela had this to say: "I hate discrimination in all its manifestations. I have fought for it. I fought it all during my life. I fight it now and will do so until the end of my days." No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. Sadly, many countries practice unfair discrimination. For instance, the USA against Latinos from Mexico and their own black citizens in Syria, Iraq, in Mozambique, and in your own country, India, against the Dalits and people of other religious persuasions. Most of us harbor some form of discrimination, and it is our life experiences and the people we choose to associate with that help us to take the steps to make the necessary attitude changes. In my own life as a human rights activist, it was not enough to say that I was against discrimination. I tried to find ways of expressing solidarity through working with individuals, communities, and organizations like the Diaconia Council of Churches, and latterly the Active Citizens Movement, that we're seeking to make a difference. I also felt that one has to take a stand against discriminatory systems and practices in whatever small and big ways that are possible in our different environments. Only in this way can one move beyond discrimination. My current concerns in my own country are lack of equity, both economically and gender-related, the prevalence of violence, including violence against women and children, climate change, food security, and now COVID-19 and the recent huge storms which are impacting so harshly on the poor and marginalized in our society. I'd like to close with a quote from the American radical feminist philosopher Mary Daly, who said, "Courage is like a habit, a virtue that you get by courageous acts. It's like learning to swim by swimming. You learn courage by couraging." Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carl Hansen, and a very happy belated birthday. On behalf of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, the Consulate General of India in Durban, it gives me great pleasure to say a huge thank you to Ms. Coral Vincent for taking time off your busy schedule to join us today. We'd like to say a huge thank you to Mr. Siva Naidu. I would like to say a special thank you to Advocate Sanele Kono Reddy. I would like to thank Ms. Leslie Ann Pansal. I would like to thank Ms. Zainab Priyadala. I would like to say a huge thank you to Ms. Tapile Buttalezi. I would like to thank my colleagues, Ms. Shristi Harinaran and Ms. Kavita Solanki for that beautiful song. I would like to thank Mr. Piyush Khandewal for all the technical support, and I would like to say thank you to our online guests for participating. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you.